There is something in human nature that makes us recoil, not just from dislike or simple antipathy, but from a deep, almost visceral repulsion. Have you ever met someone whose brazen self-assurance struck you as not merely provocative, but downright offensive, or whose insatiable, almost predatory ambition, seemingly knowing no bounds or moral principles, provoked a surge of righteous indignation in you? Or perhaps it was blatant, unconcealed vulnerability, the kind that doesn't evoke sympathy, but only a strange, caustic irritation, a desire to turn away, not to see, not to hear. These aren't just random likes or dislikes. It's a jolt, almost an electrical current, piercing through you when you encounter something that your inner world defines as unacceptable, repugnant, intolerable. A certain quality, a character trait, an expression of another's essence becomes that very pole of irritation for you, the epicenter of an internal earthquake that you feel with your entire being. You try to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation for your repulsion, but it's deeper than words. It lives somewhere at the level of instinct, an ancient taboo. And it is here at this invisible boundary between you and that which irritates that the most interesting part begins. Here, at this point of maximum tension, lies one of the most ancient and scandalous truths of depth psychology. For what evokes such a powerful, almost physical resonance of repulsion in you is not merely an external phenomenon, a foreign anomaly that can simply be dismissed. No, it is a ringing bell striking the most hidden chambers of your own soul. It is an invisible anchor that, like a fisherman's hook, latches onto something you once, perhaps unconsciously, severed from yourself, walled up in the prison of your own self. Imagine that it's not someone else's vice, not someone else's weakness, not someone else's arrogance, but merely someone else's mirror, a mirror that relentlessly reflects a fragment of your own locked away strength, your suppressed vulnerability, your unacknowledged ambition. It is nothing less than your own ghost, which you, fearing its power or its ugliness, have walled up in the dungeon of your consciousness. And the stronger your aversion, the fiercer your condemnation. The deeper and more significant is the part of you that was exiled. The louder your own shadow cries out, trying to be seen through your reaction to another. And in this venom of your condemnation, in this sharp sting of aversion, in this energy of resistance lies something far greater than mere moral superiority or a sense of self-worth. They're at the very core of this irritation. An inexhaustible energy lies dormant, a resource that you unconsciously, habitually, and sometimes with persistence worthy of a better cause, squander on resistance, on fighting an external enemy, instead of channeling it towards your own creation, your inner transformation. This is not just a negative reaction. It's a kind of compass pointing to a treasure buried beneath layers of prohibitions, fears, and social expectations. It is potential that was frozen at the moment of exile, but has retained its pristine power. Imagine if all this energy you spend on internal indignation, on analyzing others' flaws, on maintaining distance from the undesirable were directed inward. What if you could not turn away, but accept this reflected aspect as part of yourself? This is not a call for permissiveness, but an invitation to reflect on what you reject. In every pole of repulsion, there is a hidden, unique form of power waiting to be liberated. It could be the energy for breakthrough, for self-assertion, for accepting your vulnerability without shame, for healthy aggression in defending your boundaries. It could be the very ambition that drives successful people, or the very courage to be yourself that you so despise in others, but so crave for yourself. What exactly in your past, in childhood, adolescence, during your formative years, shaped this invisible barrier, this unseen boundary between who you are and who you could be if you dared to acknowledge your fullness? It is there in those distant echoes of parental guidance, social expectations, and personal traumas that the path begins to understand how a part of your true, untamed power was once perceived as something dangerous, unacceptable, or even shameful, requiring immediate expulsion into the darkest corners of your psyche. The whispers, those barely perceptible currents of disapproval, began their journey long before consciousness gained clear contours. Almost from our first hesitant steps through the labyrinths of childhood, we learn not only to walk and talk, but also to suppress. Something within us, bright and untamed, was labeled as too much, too loud, too demanding, too vulnerable. And so, step by step, brick by brick, a prison was built for those parts of us that didn't conform to externally imposed societal norms. Recall, perhaps it was your ambition, that spark that pushed you forward, demanded more, dreamed of heights. In the adult world, where modesty was often valued above audacity, it might have been perceived as arrogance or selfishness. Don't stand out, be like everyone else. Modesty becomes you. These mantras, uttered with the best intentions, became invisible chains. And so your inner strength, your ability to desire and achieve, found itself locked in the dungeon of the shadow, transforming from a driving force into a source of vague unease when you encountered its manifestations in others. Or perhaps it was your healthy aggression, not violence, but that vital energy that allows you to assert your boundaries, to say no, to fight for what you believe in. In childhood, where obedience was the gold standard, any surge of this force might have been labeled as bad behavior, rudeness, lack of manners. You were taught to be a good boy or a good girl, which often meant being accommodating, non-confrontational, submissive. And so the ability for self-protection, for assertiveness, for defending your space was exiled, leaving you defenseless against external pressure, while its manifestations in others provoked burning condemnation. And what about the right to make mistakes? This isn't just permission to stumble. It's a foundation for growth, for bold experiments, for understanding the world through your own trials and inevitable falls. But if every imperfection of yours was met with criticism, disappointment, or worse yet, ridicule, then the fear of making mistakes became all-consuming. The externally imposed striving for perfection forced you to hide any manifestations of imperfection, any misstep, and then the capacity for risk, for learning through experience, for embracing your human imperfection, retreated into the shadows, leaving you captive to paralyzing perfectionism. And of course, vulnerability. True, deep vulnerability, not weakness, but an expression of authenticity, the courage to be open, the ability to feel and trust the world. But if your tears were met with scorn, your fears with dismissal, and your openness with betrayal, then your heart learned to close itself off, walls were built, impregnable bastions erected so that no one could ever inflict pain. And so the precious capacity for intimacy, for deep connections, for compassion, both for oneself and for others, was locked deep within under 7 seals, manifesting only as an uncontrollable fear of others' openness. This is how the shadow was formed, not as a repository of evil, but as a refuge for the rejected, exiled parts of our soul, which were mistakenly perceived as bad or dangerous. These qualities are, in fact, the cornerstones of our inner strength, our authenticity, our potential for a full life. Suppressing them doesn't destroy them, but merely transforms them into phantoms whose energy continues to influence us from the subconscious. They await their time, their legitimization, their return home. It is this mechanism, the mechanism of exile and the subsequent influence of the exiled parts, that is key to understanding how we interact with the world and why certain qualities in other people evoke such a strong response in us. It's not simple dislike. It's the echo of an old, unpaid debt to ourselves, whose roots run deep into our personal history. What we exile from our inner world is like an outcast from an ancient tribe. It doesn't vanish into oblivion, but gains its own, often invisible, life on the periphery of consciousness. It doesn't resign itself to its fate, but constantly seeks ways to return, to assert itself, even through the most bizarre and painful manifestations. We, as an inner tribe, long ago, at a very tender age, decided that certain qualities, be it the pursuit of power, unrestrained anger, predatory ambition, or complete defenselessness, were too dangerous, too unacceptable for our civilized inner world. Society, parents, past traumas, all of this formed a code of unwritten laws by which these qualities were condemned to exile, and we exiled them. But what is exiled doesn't die. It merely changes form. It becomes invisible, but its energy continues to pulsate, demanding recognition. This energy, like a ghost, haunts us, manifesting in the most paradoxical way in our attitude towards others. It is here that the mechanism of projection comes into play. The psyche's workshop of illusions, ingeniously disguising the internal as external. We don't see the exiled part within ourselves, but with astonishing, sometimes maniacal clarity, we discern it in those around us. Someone who has suppressed their ambition will fiercely condemn careerists, seeing only a cynical pursuit of power in their every move. Someone who doesn't allow themselves to be vulnerable will despise weakness in others, labeling them as victims or spineless. This isn't just condemnation. It's an instinctive, almost animalistic attempt to push away what reminds us of our own inner exile. The psyche, striving at all costs to preserve the illusion of its self's integrity and goodness, passes judgment not on itself, but on the external world, projecting its own unacceptable traits onto it. As Carl Gustav Jung subtly noted, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. This is not just an aphorism carved in the stone of depth psychology, but an indicator of a fundamental principle. The world becomes our mirror, reflecting those facets of our soul that we have refused to accept. We see not the world as it truly is, but a world colored by our internal conflicts, our unresolved issues, our exiled parts. The irony is that the stronger our aversion to something external, the closer it is to our own deeply hidden shadow. This projection, this constant internal conflict with an external enemy, demands colossal energetic expenditure, draining us imperceptibly but steadily. Imagine an unpaid bill lying in your pocket. It doesn't just exist. It drains your attention, creates background anxiety, gnaws at your subconscious, constantly reminding you of its presence. Similarly, the energy of the shadow, unintegrated and unacknowledged, becomes the energy of an unpaid bill. It constantly siphons off a part of our vital energy, our creativity, our capacity for true joy and spontaneity. We spend it on maintaining an idealized facade, on an endless struggle with external enemies who are, in reality, merely phantom reflections of our internal exiled parts. This energy, this resource, could be directed towards creation, development, towards a true, resonant living of life. Instead, it is frozen in chronic tension, in endless internal and external disputes, in a sense of injustice, in resentments that seem to be caused solely by external circumstances, but in fact are rooted in deeply suppressed aspects of our psyche. Every time we react to someone with irrational irritation, uncontrolled anger, or aversion, we are effectively paying interest on this old, unpaid internal bill. We pay with our energy, our peace, our attention, our freedom. Sometimes these exiled qualities, these unpaid bills, manifest in particularly vivid, almost archetypal forms in people around us, causing such strong repulsion that it becomes impossible to ignore them. They become living embodiments of what we so carefully hide within ourselves, and their appearance in our lives is not a coincidence, but a call for deep introspection, for an encounter with what we have long fled. We have spoken of the shadow, of those invisible threads that connect us to the repressed fragments of our own self. Like shards of an ancient mirror, once shattered in a fit of fear or shame, they continue to reflect in the external world, but in a distorted form, evoking in us an irrational, sometimes unbearable repulsion. This is not merely an aversion to others' flaws. No, it's far deeper. It's a painful resonance with what we once rejected within ourselves, exiled to the hidden corners of our psyche. And so the faces of these projections appear before us, archetypal images, like actors on the stage of our inner theater, manifesting in those who, for some reason, are unbearable to our gaze, whose very presence makes us shrink from an inexplicable discomfort. One of the most recognizable, one that penetrates the most hidden corners of our soul, is undoubtedly the perpetually dissatisfied critic. They reside everywhere, in every office, within every family circle, in news feeds, and sometimes, most painfully, even in our own homes. Their mouths constantly spew forth streams of condemnation, like venomous arrows aimed at everything they encounter. Too loud, too quiet, done incorrectly, said wrongly. The weather isn't right. The government is useless. They are the living embodiment of permanent dissatisfaction, and their presence causes in us not just an itch or a desire to object, but a dull, inexplicable irritation, sometimes escalating into inexplicable rage. Why? Because in their endless complaints, in this never-ending stream of negativity, we catch an echo of our own suppressed striving for perfection, or conversely, a panicked fear of being judged, a fear of failure that we so carefully, so zealously hide even from ourselves. Their criticism is merely the loud voice of our own inner censor, which it turns out can speak in more than just our own language. Recall, Alexei. He was my colleague, a person whose every morning began not with a greeting, but with a monologue about the world's imperfections. The coffee machine brewed terrible coffee. The news was full of lies. The boss was incompetent. And the weather, as luck would have it, was always wrong. His voice, low and grumbling, seeped into every crack like a fog, poisoning the office air. One might think, so what? Let him grumble. It's his business. But his words, like invisible needles, pricked deep inside, right beneath my ribs. My gut tightened with irrational irritation, and my hand involuntarily reached for the phone to jot down another complaint. But not about Alexei, but about myself, about my unfinished tasks, my not good enough results, my doubts. I saw in him not just a grumbler, but a silent yet all-seeing judge whose perpetual condemnation somehow extended to me, even though he never spoke about me directly. His criticism was the backdrop against which my own inner critic gained voice and power, growing to unbearable proportions. And every time Alexei opened his mouth, I felt a wave of dull, impotent anger rising within me, directed not so much at him as at the part of myself that so desperately strived for an ideal and so feared the slightest imperfection. Or here's another equally irritating and sometimes outright infuriating image: the victim of weakness. This is someone who constantly laments their fate, insurmountable circumstances, the world's injustice, and how everything is against them. They seem stuck in a sticky web of powerlessness, awaiting salvation from outside, yet without a single movement or effort, they try to change their situation. Their endless complaints, their passive helplessness, their inability to take life into their own hands evoke in us not so much compassion as a dull, irrational indignation. Why doesn't he do anything? Our inner voice cries out, drowning all reasonable argument. And in this cry, there's not only a condemnation of another's passivity, but also an echo of our own carefully concealed fear of responsibility, of the need to act, of that moment when we ourselves find ourselves at a crossroads, unsure where to step and afraid to admit our own confusion, our own powerlessness, which we so diligently mask with activity and determination. There's also a third, no less provocative character capable of unsettling even the most balanced person, the arrogant know-it-all. They don't necessarily have to be a recognized guru or lecturer, but they are always ready to proclaim the one true truth, cloaking it in pompous, sometimes bombastic phrases. Their confidence borders on arrogance, their self-presentation on outright theatricality. They might speak about spirituality, business, health, anything, but their words often seem empty and their charisma strained, artificial. What is it about them that grates so much, that evokes such sharp, almost physical repulsion? Perhaps it's our own suppressed right to be visible, to be heard, to assert ourselves loudly without fear of judgment. We perhaps fear appearing ridiculous, too loud, too ambitious, and so their uncompromising manner, their unconcealed desire to be the center of attention, provokes an internal protest in us, for they dare to be what we ourselves have forbidden, what we have repressed into our shadow, fearing to be too much. These figures are merely masks, ghostly reflections, behind which lie those parts of ourselves that were exiled to the twilight corners of the soul, deprived of light and the right to exist. They are not enemies, but rather unsettling yet persistent messengers meant to point to hidden resources, to untapped potential, to the energy locked behind the walls of our internal prohibitions. For behind every shadow, every repelling projection, lies something invaluable, something alive, awaiting its liberation and return to the whole self. The raw discomfort, the sharp sting of irritation, once dismissed as mere antipathy towards another, now appears as something far deeper, a distorted echo of our own exiled potential. For behind every perceived demon, behind every quality in others that elicits our most visceral reaction of repulsion, lies not emptiness, but a dormant resource, repressed into the shadows simply because at some critical moment it was perceived as excessive, dangerous, or unacceptable. Imagine someone whose brazen self-assurance causes an internal grating within you. If this isn't just fleeting irritation, but a deep, recurring aversion, then behind this self-assurance might lie your own suppressed right to be visible, to assert yourself confidently, to have unwavering faith in your own worth. Perhaps you were once taught that being too noticeable was improper, that modesty was the highest virtue, and thus your inner voice, wishing to be heard, was exiled to the shadow. But this voice is not pride, but a genuine force of self-expression, the ability to take your place in the world without apologizing for your existence. Or take the perpetually dissatisfied critic whose fault-finding seems unbearable to you. Behind this seemingly destructive trait often lies highly developed critical thinking, a striving for perfection, the ability to see details and potential improvements. If you suppress this part within yourself, fearing being condemned for negativity or fault-finding, you deprived yourself of a powerful tool for analysis, discernment, and the pursuit of high standards. This isn't just grumbling, but the potential for fine-tuning, for creating something truly impeccable, for defending your boundaries against what is subpar or insincere. It's the ability to ask the right questions, not taking everything at face value. And what about the victim of weakness, Hapu, whose passivity and inability to act provoke righteous anger in you? Behind this image may lie your own deeply suppressed ability to surrender to the flow, to accept help, to show vulnerability without shame, or even the capacity for self-compassion. Perhaps in your history, being weak or needy was tantamount to catastrophe, and you learned to always be strong, always in control. But such total autonomy deprives you of the depth of human experience, the opportunity to be gentle with yourself in moments of fatigue or pain, to accept support, which is not weakness but a higher form of trust and connection, is not an absence of will, but perhaps a deep wisdom that allows you to release control where it's inappropriate and to trust life or others. Thus, every demon is merely a distorted reflection of a dormant archetype within us, an invaluable quality awaiting its recognition. The projection of these qualities onto others is not a curse, but an invitation to alchemy, to transform the lead of unconscious irritation into the gold of internal resource. It's reclaiming the right to be ambitious, but not predatory, critical, but not destructive, vulnerable, but not helpless. It's the right to be whole, encompassing all facets of human experience without dividing them into good and bad. When we refuse this inner work, when these repressed parts remain in the shadow, their energy doesn't disappear. It continues to act, but no longer as a resource, but as an invisible saboteur, subtly influencing our decisions and relationships, creating invisible barriers on the path to the life we so crave. Consider those invisible threads that bind you, the barriers that stand in the way of what you desire, even when all conditions for success seem to be present. Whenever you shy away from an opportunity that promises growth or repeatedly stumble in relationships, feeling misunderstood or betrayed, this is no coincidence. This is the dance of the shadow. Imagine a person who despises any form of self-confidence, seeing in it only arrogance and egoism. In childhood, they might have been taught that modesty is a virtue and self-expression is a vice. And so, when a path to career growth opens before them, requiring public visibility and healthy self-presentation, they are seized by irrational fear. They subconsciously sabotage their presentations, avoid leadership positions, preferring to remain in the shadows, even if their knowledge and talent surpass many. They fear becoming like them, those they themselves condemned, not realizing that the part they rejected is not arrogance, but the ability to assert themselves, to defend their ideas, to be seen. This unaccepted shadow becomes an invisible ceiling, limiting their self-development, condemning them to perpetually reside in the shadow of others' successes. Or take another example, a woman who since childhood was taught to be strong and independent, suppressed any inclination towards vulnerability, towards asking for help, towards showing weakness. In everyone who dares to openly express their emotions, who cries or seeks support, she sees weakness and infantilism, experiencing a barely perceptible irritation. In relationships, this turns into a catastrophe. She is unable to accept help, even when desperately needing it, preferring to bear all burdens alone. Her partners feel unneeded. Their attempts to offer support encounter a wall of detachment. Intimacy, which requires mutual vulnerability, becomes impossible. Her shadow, the right to be weak, the right to make mistakes, the right to be dependent, destroys the bridges over which true intimacy could come. She suffers from loneliness, not realizing that she herself pushes away those who are willing to be close out of fear of becoming like them, though she once condemned. Or perhaps you're familiar with the feeling of not being able to say no. When others' desires become more important than your own and you feel more and more burdens placed upon you while you merely smile, internally seething with indignation. You condemn egoists who only think of themselves, not realizing that within this condemnation lies your own unaccepted shadow, healthy aggression, the right to self-protection, the ability to set boundaries. You fear becoming bad, rude, inconvenient, and this suppressed part, instead of serving you, turns against you, draining your resources, leading to burnout and a chronic sense of resentment. In relationships, this creates an imbalance where your needs are ignored and your dissatisfaction grows until it one day erupts in an uncontrolled outburst or leads to complete depletion. Perhaps at this moment, the thought flashed through your mind, but that's not me. I simply don't like such people, and that's normal. It's not my shadow. This is a common and significant objection. However, let's consider this from a different perspective. Irritation is not merely a random emotion. It acts as a beacon pointing to something repressed within your own psyche. If that trait were fully integrated within you, it wouldn't provoke such a strong reaction. We don't get irritated by what is neutral to us or by what we have already accepted within ourselves. Irritation is always a signal of an internal conflict, indicating that a part of you is struggling with what you perceive externally because it mirrors something you've rejected within yourself. It's not a condemnation, but an invitation for introspection. An unaccepted shadow doesn't just hinder your life. It becomes a source of chronic failures, recurring patterns, and shattered hopes. It deprives us of wholeness, trapping us in a one-sided existence. However, there's another equally potent yet often overlooked aspect to this phenomenon. Sometimes we project not only what we reject, but also what we believe doesn't belong to us. While we've discussed shadows cast by inner demons, those rejected parts of ourselves manifesting as irritation and aversion towards others, is now time to delve into a different realm, a realm of light where shadows don't frighten, but rather beckon with their radiant allure. This is the golden shadow. No less insidious than its darker counterpart, it operates not through repulsion, but through admiration, through the idealization of what we see externally, but fail to acknowledge within ourselves. Imagine someone whose charisma seems unattainable, whose wisdom appears otherworldly, and whose talent feels divine. You see them on screen, on stage, or in books, and you feel awe and reverence. Perhaps it's a renowned psychologist whose theories resonate as revelations, or a successful entrepreneur whose journey inspires admiration. We elevate them to pedestals, worship their achievements, and absorb their every word, striving to imbibe even a fraction of their greatness, their unique gift. Yet within this act of veneration, this silent acknowledgement of another's superiority, lies a subtle, almost imperceptible act of self-sabotage. Unconsciously, we surrender a part of our own light, our potential, our power externally. We project onto these idols not just character traits, but entire layers of unrealized abilities, dormant talents, and undiscovered gifts, which in our subconscious belief can only exist out there, externally in someone else, but never within ourselves. It's akin to admiring a rich vein of gold in someone else's hands while failing to notice that your own ground is strewn with no lesser treasures. Every admiration, every reverence for another's genius becomes an invisible chain, holding us back from our own blossoming. We convince ourselves that we cannot be as eloquent, as insightful, as successful, or as influential because all these qualities are already occupied by someone else, someone more deserving. And herein lies the true tragedy. We voluntarily deprive ourselves of the opportunity to discover and embody the unique essence within us, the potential that could transform our lives. Our golden shadow is not merely a collection of positive attributes, it's a treasure map to our true self, to a version of us capable of greatness, if only we dare to recognize it within ourselves, rather than solely in the mirror of others' achievements. It's akin to standing before a majestic mountain range, admiring its peaks, yet forgetting you possess your own wings capable of soaring to no lesser heights, or like gazing at the brilliance of a distant star, oblivious to the spark flickering within your own heart, ready to ignite into a flame. We become passive spectators of a play titled Someone Else's Success, Someone Else's Wisdom, Someone Else's Talent, instead of stepping onto our own stage and writing our own script. Jung, in discerning this mechanism, didn't merely point to the importance of integrating rejected aspects. He saw that the fullness of being, true individuation, is achieved only when an individual reclaims those qualities they idealize in others, recognizing them as part of their own unique potential. This doesn't mean we should cease to admire. It means we must learn to transform admiration into awareness, projection into introspection, and idealization into a source of inspiration. Understanding these two sides of the same coin, both the dark and golden shadows, unlocks a colossal inner resource. It's a path where every irritant and every object of admiration becomes not an obstacle, but a pointer to our true strength. And there are concrete steps that allow us to begin this process of reclaiming ourselves. True alchemy begins not in merely understanding the shadow, but in actively reclaiming those fragments of self that have been scattered across the world and mistakenly taken for others. Every fervent condemnation, every whispering envy, every hidden admiration directed outward is an invisible thread connecting a part of your essence to an external form. Imagine a vast, radiant river of potential flowing through you. When you project, you divert the currents of this river into the sands of another's existence. The philosophy we now embrace is one of profound reclamation, gently yet firmly drawing these currents back into your own reservoir. This doesn't mean becoming the object of your projection, but rather acknowledging the seed of that quality, be it courage, vulnerability, cunning, or grace within your own fertile ground. It's about transforming an external reflection into an internal resource, finally liberating the power that lay dormant, tethered by the illusion of separation. To commence this sacred work, engage in a simple yet powerful exercise. In the coming days, become a discerning observer of your own reactions. When you encounter someone who evokes an unusually strong emotional response in you, be it a surge of irritation, a pang of envy, or an overwhelming sense of admiration, pause. Do not rush to judgment or idealization. Instead, ask yourself, what specific quality in this person elicits such a profound response within me? Is it their unwavering confidence, their seeming lack of shame, their effortless charm, their quiet resilience? Once you name that quality, turn your gaze inward. Ask, where in the quiet chambers of my own being does this quality reside, perhaps unrecognized, suppressed, or simply awaiting cultivation? Do not seek perfection, seek acknowledgement. Allow the answer to emerge without self-criticism. Perhaps the arrogance you despise is merely nascent, unexpressed assertiveness. Perhaps the genius you idolize is your own dormant talent. Simply acknowledge its presence, even if it's just a whisper. This act of internal recognition begins the process of severing the external thread and bringing that energy home. This path of internal cartography, of meticulously remapping the territories of the self, is profoundly transformative. It promises not only a deeper understanding of who we are, but also a tangible shift in our energetic landscape, enabling us to move with greater authenticity and power. However, the self does not exist in a vacuum. Once this inner architecture begins to reconfigure, another equally profound question inevitably arises. How do these newly integrated facets of our being manifest in the intricate dance of our human connections? How does the newly reclaimed self navigate the complex, often challenging terrain of relationships where our deepest patterns are not merely observed, but actively enacted and transformed.